Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video we're gonna go over the again KS0PRO connectors. So I'm gonna go over and show you how I make these connectors and how you can make these connectors easier if you don't have a soldering tool. So I mean the best way, I think, in my opinion, is if you do without overclocking. You have these Pcie cables. If you had the GPU mining rigs and you have this server PSUs, breakout boards ready to go, it's pretty much no-brainer. You just get those cables that it's 16 gauge. Make sure don't use any of this 18 gauge cables, because they will fail eventually at this connector. All these cables will fail for 18 gauge. So if you use 16 gauge cable, you can have those 24-inch, splice it, cut it on half, and use two of the ends of this cable, right? So I'll show you. This is the one end, and then I solder just like right here, three of the wires together, and you solder them together. So it's not very nice job, but it works as long as you solder all the way thoroughly, all the way around the connectors, and make sure you do your negative and positive in the right order. So once you've done this part, you can basically buy this pre-made cable on Amazon. It's $10 for two, so $5 a piece. And let's say everything else you already had it, so you just need these little connectors where you can buy the pack of 10s. And also probably, so it will cost you $1 for a piece. So the total setup here, it will run you about $6 if you already have the rest of the stuff. Now, yes, if you have to buy this PCIe cable, then you're spending a little bit extra. And if you need to buy all of that from scratch, then you probably can get and just buy, better off of buying with the veteran miner, the cable that's already made from PCIe to the KS0PRO. So now let's talk about this cable. So this looks like a 16 gauge cable. I just purchased on Amazon the 16 gauge cable that doesn't have any connector, and I'll show you how you can make up your connector easily without soldering. Kind of went over that in the last video, but I didn't make it right, so I'll show you guys how to do it. So let's build one in, and I'll go through the process. So if you don't want to buy like this and solder this connector, what you can do instead of doing this setup here, which is slightly cleaner, I think it's easier to disconnect if you need to switch these guys in any case. But if you don't like to build that and solder that connector, there's easy way of doing it. You buy just pre-made connector just like that with the two negative and positive, red and black. And the connector, this connector, they state rated for 15 amp, but I wouldn't trust more than 10 amp on this connector. So let's have the other end of the PCIe cable. So make sure the lengths of these wires all the same, right? And then all you have to do is just get your positive, which is yellow, and clean them up, right? So you'll just clean about a little bit over 3/8 of an inch, roughly right there, all three positive cable. All you need just your wire stripper, and you get them pretty much like this, twisted the end. So you have the end of the positive, all three of them ready to go just like that. And then do the same thing to the negative side, all three of them. I like to use all three. You don't need to probably use all three for the amperage load, but it's nice and safe to have all three of the wires connected. The reason for is just a safer way to do it, because you're not relying just on a single connection. So if any one of them has problem, you actually using the other two wires that it's gonna supply enough power, even on a single 16 gauge wire, okay? So after you do that, you're pretty much ready to connect to your fast connectors. So I have two options that I found on Amazon. Number one is this combiner, quick connector, which what you can do, you can use your positive and negative separately. So you could have three wires come in on there and just one coming out there. So you could use that. or I actually prefer of using these guys that I found, which has a color, so you kind of keep in mind, use like a blue. I didn't find the black and yellow or black and red, which will be ideal. You can use like an orange as a red as your positive and blue as a negative. So what we're gonna do is connect all three of these wires, and you can spread them nicely and evenly, just like so, and connect them all to the orange side. So that's gonna be your positive made up connector right there. So you can just stick open and stick all three of them all the way in, and just close it, click close it, and pull really hard just to test, make sure none of the cables coming out. So that's a really nice connection. It's actually 30 amp rated connector, so it will have plenty of support for your amperage. You're never gonna exceed 30 amp on your load for this miner for KS0PRO, but it's really safe way, in my opinion, to do this way, because this connection you're never gonna overload. And then you do your negative to the blue side, and that's it. So you already have made up wire just like that, ready to connect. And it took literally just less than 30 seconds, right? So now you open up the second part and connect your red wire to the positive and black to the negative. You slide just inside and close it and pull real hard just to test it. So right there, your wire already made up and ready to connect to KS0PRO. Now, lastly, what we want to do is connect this to my tester that I can load to probably to 7. Okay, so pay attention to the wires. The site on the load here is only 198, so almost 200 watts we load in here, and that's 17 amp. At 120 volt, it's showing 230 watts, so it's about 30 watts extra power consumption because of the efficiency of the PSU. So that's our pretty much load here. I don't know, let's keep it for maybe 10-15 minutes at least. Hopefully this is not gonna overheat quickly, and shut it off because there's a temperature controller on this loader mechanism. But I can tell you guys, like right here, all this is gonna be perfectly cool connection, just because this designed for holding up 30 amp on every single wire, this connector, so there's gonna be no issue on this side. This is 30 amp connector on this side, so you can load safely 30 amp at 80% efficiency, right? So this connector, you don't want to overload more than 270 watt of power for 16 gauge cable. So we'll be a lot under. I actually loaded this to 300 watt and it was fine, but I don't recommend to use for 2 miners. Just 1 miner should be perfectly fine, and you can create this cable here. Now the weakest point in this setup, it's still gonna be this connection right here. Even though your connector, your wire rated to hold up 15 amp right there in this setup, this connector, it's still the issue. The barrel connection there, it's where the wire connections goes together. That's where it overheats. Like I already can feel this is warmed up a little bit. So let's give it another maybe 20 minutes and call back and check. Alright guys, so it's been about over 10 minutes here. I had to reduce a little bit amperage, and then I put the extra fan to cool down this power load, and to make sure I can increase. So I'm just gonna run 17 amp, but it's been 10 minutes under load, around 200 watts here. And let's take a look what happened to the temperature. So first of all, starting over from the breakboard here on PSU, we are totally can see the temperature of this I don't know if you could see in the screen here, it's totally fine. All of these wires super cool to touch, cool, just the ambient temperature, I want to say, maybe slightly warmer, but nothing dangerous at all. So you could see this connector where all the wires come together. It's super cool. The hottest part is actually this 16 gauge wire coming out to our barrel connector. So that's reaching out around 36 degrees, which is not that hot at all, 36 degrees Celsius, right? So it's basically your body temperature. And then as we go further, the connector is where we get this temperature load. Again, see, it's overloading even with the extra fan. So I'll keep it 16 amp. So it's 217 watt at the wall, 188 watt on the 12 volt load, but it still, take a look at the temperature of between these connectors. It's 57 degree Celsius. So I think it's pretty much, it's very hot. And if we compare that, we need to run this on the, on this. I'll probably will do a next test. I'm gonna run on this Amazon pre-made XT60 cable, right? So we could compare to this and see if this connector gets any warmer on the same load. Kind of interesting to see that. And also, as the bonus, I found on Amazon, which is pretty cool, this long cable. It shows that it's gonna be just half of the cable spliced here, just exactly same as this cable, ready to connect. But this is 14 gauge. Actually, look how thick this cable and this connector compared to the, if we compare with this connector there, it's a humongous, it's super heavy duty. It says that it's rated to 20 amp, and I'm not sure if that's the rating to 20 amp. I don't know if that's a true rating here, guys, but it's, look how heavy, how thick this connector is. It's like the wire almost double the size on this 14 gauge wire. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna cut it while we're still doing a little bit of load here. I'll cut it, splice it on half, because you can use, this is almost like a 3-feet cable with the two connectors, and you receive pack of 2 of this. So ultimately you can use for 4 miners. I don't know if you order same, it's gonna come, because picture shows differently on Amazon, so I cannot guarantee it's gonna come this way. But in my case, it's just $9 purchase, or $10 make you a 4 1.5 foot cables, and all we gotta do, just make it halfway, or you can do the lengths you need just to reach your KS0PRO. So what's cool about it, if there are different locations, you can make one shorter, one longer, and we'll just cut it right there. And let's take a look at the size. Okay, and then we're gonna just cut this off the rest of the insulation right there. So that's how big is this cable. The 14 gauge wire, you could tell it's a lot thicker. So once we clean it up, let's just clean this 14 gauge. Yeah, wow, look at this. Yeah, definitely much thicker wire. So it is 14 gauge wire, and all it goes to this connector. So that's pretty much pre-made, your pre-made connector right there. So again, we're gonna use this beautiful clip connector, combiner basically box, and keeping your positive and negative, and push all the way in. See, like this little piece coming out. Again, second time, let's try. Okay, put them all together nicely and lock it up. So look at this. Now after you're done, you can actually probably wrap this whole thing with the electrical tape if you want to cover it up, but I think it's pretty much safe, in my opinion, to use. These connectors are really humongous in a way. This keep on overheating at 16 amps, so I'll have to reduce to 15 amp load. And again, you get your second connector here and connect to the other side just right there, like so. So take a look at the sizes, guys. Take a look at the size of this wire. The 14 gauge and 16 gauge, you could see hopefully the difference. Let me disconnect. So let's take a look one more time. What's our temperature? So you can see the ambient temperature here. It's 78 degrees. I'm gonna turn this fan on. So we have 78 degrees, probably some heat coming over from this. Okay, so I have another one of these connector, right? So we're gonna connect here and to our setup. Let's just clean it up here a little bit. Okay, and let's connect to XT60. Boom. Okay, so we do have connection now. So yeah, I guess this connector already failed after I loaded to 20 amp. It definitely melted inside and stopped working. So let's put this on our 16 amp. Let's be fair, this is probably rated for 10 amp. So we'll put at the 15 amp load. Let's say you're loading to your, trying to get your overclocks set up at the minimum. But definitely, guys, I do not recommend to use this. What's happening with these connectors, I'll show you. The metal piece that in your KS0PRO right there, I hope you could see, it's getting melted right there, and it will pull out together from your KS0PRO barrel connector. It will just pull out that male connector from over there. So that's the problem with these cables. They will overheat the internal part in KS0PRO, I think. But let's give a test for this, see how much warmer this connector gets versus the wire that they rated on Amazon for 15 amp. So this is 10 amp rated. When you are buying this, it says 10 amp. So now we load in 15 amp on this wire. So we tested this at 15 amp and it goes to 60 degree Celsius at 75 degree Fahrenheit in ambient temperature. So let's see what this connector will do. Let's give it 10 minutes as well. Let's see, just to be fair, we'll do 10 minutes load test and let's see what's gonna happen at the 15 amp. I don't know if I can run 16 amp constant because it's keep on overheating this loader discharger. Okay, so let's give it a 10 minutes. All right, so I gave enough time for this wire to be on the load. So you could see this part of the wire is totally fine. And then you could see how this part is warming up. So let's take a look at this. So we still have like around 40 degrees in these neighborhoods. Just want you guys to see. And then as we come to this connector, this is a 96 degrees Celsius. So this is insanely hot. If you touch it, it's super, super hot. There's nothing that hot on this as this connector. So just be careful using this on over 10 amp because loading 15 amp, it's pretty much melting everything around. That's super soft. And I think it's the connector is even hotter. Let's take a look. The end of the connector And it's showing 90 degrees, but I think it's a lot hotter. Look, it's 100 degrees inside, 100 Celsius. That's crazy. And this connector is super hot. This side is just ridiculously hot. All right, so for this last test, for this 20 amp wire, we're gonna test this with the new, I'm gonna make one more PCIe quick connector. So I'll show you how to do it. It's basically you splice this on half. Very simple way of doing it. You can just make this halfway bend and cut it on the middle, right? So we're gonna clean this up. This is different, the wires kind of together, but it doesn't really matter which one you use as long as it's a 16 gauge wire and connector. So we'll clean it up and cut just like that. Now we're gonna separate these three, okay, and then we're gonna do 3 positives and clean them one by one. Or if you have the tool, stripper, you can just do them all together, I guess. So we're going to do this 3 positive. And twist them together. And again, this is 16 gauge wire. So this is going to be 3 of 16 gauge connected to 14 gauge. So it's a huge overkill, I think, in my opinion, but I just wondering what temperatures it's gonna bring us at this connector after we do this test. We'll put it also maybe run for 15-20 minutes, or maybe, again, just the time-wise, as longer it sits on the load, it's getting warmer, obviously. So imagine if you are running 24/7 at that load, it will definitely eventually burn that connector, because as it heats, it expands and connection becomes weaker, and it's keep on warming up. After it reaches a certain point in temperature, it's gonna melt and not gonna even cool down anymore. So even if your ambient temperature dropping, you're still potentially gonna get that connector super hot. So after you're done with all this, you twist all these cables, you do your 3 negative together, right? We'll just run. It's gonna be a lot easier for this configuration because this is all in one side, all my negatives. Just go straight right in. We'll lock them down, test it out, and then we have 3 positive. So this cable that it doesn't have a loose cable, they're all kind of in a way together. It become nice cleaner setup. Look at this. So this cable looks super clean, just a little bulky there on this connector. So let's test it out, put it on the same load. I'm kind of wondering how this humongous cable gonna perform on 14 gauge wire here at the connector, because that's where our load is mainly gonna be. So 15 amp, we'll try to run 16 amp load on this connector, same as we did for the other one. Keep in mind, this connector warmed up to almost 100 degree. Not this one, but this one for XT60, just because it's rated only for 10 amp and we loaded for 16 amp. Now, this one is rated 15 amp wire, but again, the connector itself may not support that, so be aware of that. And now, while it's on the load, I'll put out let's just get that going, and we'll come back in 15 minutes and see the result with how warm this connection gonna be and this 16 amp load, and if anything gonna get warmer or not. So let's leave it at the test, and I'll come back and check on that. Okay, so it was over 30 minutes now under load of 216 watt at the wall, but 187 watt at 12 volts, 16 amp load on this wire connector. Most important is this barrel connector, right? So let's take a look at the temperatures here. What do we see there? Nothing wrong with the cable, right? So obviously 16 gauge is a perfect cable. There's nothing on connector unusual. This is the temperatures here are getting hot only on PSU, slightly warmer. There is nothing on this connector that's unusual. You could see this connector is totally fine. 30, what do we have? 36 degrees at the connectors, so 39 maybe. Yeah, nothing wrong. The wire itself is actually slightly warm to touch. I don't know if this temperature comes from the connector over a long time and it's just traveling down. So let's take a look at the actual connector here. So yes, we do have 70 degree. Obviously it's not 98 degree, but it's still very, very hot. I don't know if you can guys see that temperature, 71 degrees. So it's been only like 34 minutes, so a lot longer obviously than the other wire, but it's still probably gonna fail at your barrel connector on KS0, unless you have a good airflow. I don't know, I can't recommend this, any of that cable running overclocked at such a high temperatures. Now let's take a look inside this barrel connector again. This one is 77 degree and this connector is also 71, 70 degree. So yes, it's really hard inside getting, but it didn't melt like the other connectors, so it didn't become soft like over here. My other connector just basically got totally soft on this X60. Even though S60 designed to handle 60 amp and it should be 30 amp constant handling, all right, but this connector is the issue. No more than 10 amp, guys, absolutely no. I would even say 9 amp. So your clocks, if you're running 12 volts on the clocks, you should be totally fine. All right, and to be fair, we'll test this 16 gauge wire one more time for 30 minutes at 16 amp load. So this wire rated on Amazon for 15 amp load. So let's just put it on a little bit over, slightly over, exceeding those ratings just to see. Now my suspicion that this connector right here cannot handle cannot handle that amperage, so it may get all the heat from that. But you saw, guys, like on this connector you would see 90 degree heat. On this we measure was also about 78 and 70 on this connector. So this was a lot cooler just because of the wire thickness. So I guess some heat from the wire, heating the wire itself, it also comes to the connector. So I guess this is the best setup so far that I've tested as far as the heat on this connector. And it'll also actually, believe it or not, the cheapest way to buy it, because you can buy 2 of this cable, which you can make 4 of the connectors, and it's also longest. It will be 1.5 long pieces of wire compared to this 12 inches. So you'll get 18 inches, so extra long, extra heavy duty wire. So I guess only problem is very it's not very flexible as much, so you got to be careful not to break anything in when you're pulling into your shroud or anywhere, just to be able to connect carefully and not to break anything in the KS0PRO. But otherwise, I think it's the best set that I've tested so far is 16 gauge PCIe cable. This connector will never get overheated because it's 30 amp load capable. And obviously the 14 gauge cable capable of holding easily 20 amp of the power, right? So the only still question remains, like, will this connector survive in KS0, because the barrel in KS0 connector, the positive is warming up so hot that it may glues together to that internal part, and eventually you can rip off when you're pulling out the middle of that connector. So I think if you keep it inside the unit and not pulling out, you'll maybe okay, but I guess I wouldn't recommend to go over and exceed your rating for your KS0PRO safety. However, this is, I think, so far is the best setup. So let's give 30 minutes for this cable, because this is more flexible wire, but I think it's gonna warm up in 30 minutes a lot more. So let's leave it for about 30 minutes and we'll come back and check it out. This temperature so far, yeah, it starts warming up there, 45 degrees already. So let's see how it will go. Obviously this connector is perfectly fine. The wire itself, though, on 16 gauge, it's slightly warm to a touch, believe it or not. So even one single 16 gauge, I would probably be worried. And the 14, I always use silicone cable like this 14 gauge for this testing, and all my setup with the K0 at 14 gauge. I would even use 12 gauge, is a little bit too thick of the wire, but 14 gauge perfectly fits there, and it's totally fine handling so far at 16 gauge wires at the Pcie, because you have three of those wires. So I think it's totally safe. So let's leave it and come back in 30 minutes. All right, so it was almost 40 minutes on a test. I ran it on 16 amp as well for this wire, that it's only rated for 15. So let's take a look, and you could see the anywhere from Pcie cable, super cool. Everything is under. You could get the temperature from PSU, that is a little bit hotter, but the wire itself, it's super cool. It's about 34 to 36 degree, okay? Now when we go further to connector, that's our problem again. So this one is actually running at 49 degrees, so close to 50 degrees Celsius, which is a lot cooler than the other cable, surprisingly. Even after 40 minutes of load, it's pretty hot. I mean, it's not as hot as the other ones, so they're 48 Celsius on this connector. So I guess it really depends how well this connector attaches. So it's even worked out better than this heavy duty 14 gauge wire, which it completely surprised me, you know. I don't know why it outperformed this connector, but it doesn't make sense to me. How is it possible? But anyways, it looks like this 16 gauge wire is one of the coolest running at the connector so far. Anyway, I'll post the link down below so you can check out this wire, check out this rating of the wire, but I wouldn't rely on the connector at the KS0PRO. It probably will still fail because of the internal parts of the connector. Now, to get even fancier, I'm gonna show you a little trick here, how to make these terminals here at the wire, at the Pcie wire. You can get these connectors, they sold like in the pack, these terminals, and as assortment, you can get them different sizes. So this one I use just for the 18 gauge wire, so they could fit perfectly into our connector right there, into this hole. So what we do, we just slide right over the wire, twist it in, just to make sure it's right at the end of the wire. And then using this crimple tool, just put it inside and crimped, and it's done. See how perfect this connector. So, and you do to the rest of these wires. This way you're never gonna have this loose wires at the end of the PCIe cable, so you don't have to worry if you need to disconnect them and or reconnect. All you gotta do, it's really literally takes just a few extra minutes to get this ready, but it makes your connection a lot nicer and perfect. Look at that. So after you're done with this connector, the terminals, all you gotta do, just open up your piece there and slide it on, all the positive and all the negative. Make sure you're using correct side, and they fit just perfectly snug right in there. And you close it up same way, and it's a perfect connection every time. So this way the wire is not going to be pulled, and it's going to be a perfect terminals connection over there. I guess that's just the whole point. You can do same to the other. If you're using the 16 gauge cable, just like that, you can use the terminals for that side as well. It will not work for 14 gauge. You probably need to slide them directly into this connector. So that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys like it. Leave me the comment down below what you experience with these connectors and cables. See, yeah, it's around 52 degrees after I moved a little bit. So I guess it all depends how great is the initial connector. If the connector moved a little bit, it looks like it may be heated a lot quicker, but it's still coolest connector, 50 degrees so far. So we have 50 on this connector. The one that XT60 pre-made was running the hottest, 90 something degree, right over 90 degrees. And then the one that the largest connector which we use is from 14 gauge cable. It actually was around 70 degree, right? So that's pretty much my results. Let me know what you have. All right, so I decided to do one more test on this 14 gauge wire because I didn't like how it showed up. So I ran 40 minutes now connected, 16 amp, 188 watts. And so the second test, slightly better, it's 57 degrees, 57 degrees Celsius at the connector. Everything else seems to be okay. There is no overheating at any other, let me get rid of all these other connectors that I tested so it's not in the way. All right, that okay. So we have just one connector here. So there is no issue with the cable itself. 36 degrees there. Connector super cool. 36, 40 at the connector. So this wire itself, even though it's 14 gauge, it gets a little bit warm, around 40 degrees, but the connector part is what I don't like. This is where it gets 59, 58 degrees at the connection, right? 60 degrees right there, you could see, guys. So I guess at a certain point it's getting hot when you, depending how well you connect those two, and they are getting kind of soft at the when it's overheats. So we'll consider that even the 14 gauge cable doesn't really help you with that 16 amp load. Obviously 16 amp you're not gonna have, but you at 12 volt you're gonna run close to probably 14 amp. I just gonna test like to the limit. I can't put even more amp. I wish I could because it's overheating. This load designed to go up to 250 watts, but it's overheats the heatsink. So anyways, looks like the 16 gauge cables handle better temperature for some reason, and this 14 gauge cable, even though it's cheaper, it maybe the material they made is not you know, 100% copper, you know. I don't know why they put 20 amp rating on this if it's heats up so at 16 amp. So anyways, even if you have rating on the wire, it doesn't mean you can run safely. You gotta make sure you use, even though all of those UL listed, all of these cables, I checked, they're all UL listed. So anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.